This week on the TT Show, NVIDIA has been accused of scraping YouTube videos for AI training. AMD Ryzen 9000 series CPU reviews online. Intel stock price slides 30% after 15% of the company's workforce is fired. New Radeon GPUs are on the horizon. Ubisoft requires DLSS to play Star Wars Outlaws, and much, much more. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the TT Show. My name is Jak Connor. I'm a hardware editor over at Tweaktown, and today I'm joined by my co-host,
Kosta Andriadis, gaming hardware editor at Tweaktown.
Hello, new CPU reviewer for Tweaktown.
Temporary CPU reviewer.
Temporary CPU reviewer.
Just off the bench. Coach put me in for
quick stint.
Just brought me in for to win the match, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. You came in at a clutch time because we got the new AMD 9000 series.
Zen
embargoes
5.
have lifted.
Yeah. So there was the desktop CPU industry at the moment is obviously in a state of chaos because of Intel's issues. And
they're going through issues, are they?
Pardon?
Are they going through issues?
Yeah. Apparently there's they've got stability issues that are going to be resolved sometime soon.
Yeah, sure. I know, go on.
Yeah, we talked about that last week and how the damage, if the damage is done, the damage is done. And you got to replace your CPU. So it's like chaos in there. So the timing for AMD at the moment is essentially you've got a new CPU launch, Zen 5, the next generation of the desktop CPUs first coming to the scene. So it's almost like a layup. You know what I mean? Intel's dealing with problems. And
problems.
So it's almost like a layup. So our normal CPU reviewer, Tyler, is in hospital at the moment. So I came in to review the 9600X and the 9700X for the new Zen 5 desktop CPUs. These are the lower end models. So the higher end SKU reviews will be handled by Tyler when they drop in about a week or so from now. And then, so this is just temporary. So just on that perspective, so I, obviously thoroughly tested the 9600X and the 9700X. But could only really compare it based on data that's already online, but also specifically with the previous gen flagship, which was the CPU that I was using, the Ryzen 9 7950X, the 170 watt beast from the Zen 4 launch. So it was pretty much let's look at what these mainstream and sort of affordable CPUs how they compare to that previous gen one. And from my perspective, they are impressive. However, a lot of online reviews that are focusing specifically on gaming performance, showing that the performance isn't quite a massive uplift compared to the previous generation, that it's only a single-digit increase. However, as we know with gaming, the GPU is king, right? If you've got a 4060 and you swap that out for a 4090, you're going to see triple the performance, right?
Yeah.
If you've got a 9600X and you swap it out for the 9900X, you're not going to see triple the gaming performance, right?
No.
It's a different thing.
You'll see within 5%, maybe even just over.
The CPU handles stuff when it comes to gaming, but it's not necessarily the be-all, end-all. I think CPUs have kind of hit the point now where, desktop CPUs, if you get any of these Zen 5 CPUs and you put them in a gaming rig, it's going to be a decent CPU. Is going to handle every game. You're not going to have a CPU bottleneck with one of these chips. And you wouldn't have had one with Zen 4 or even, I should say the Intel CPUs, but they've got their own problems, right? So both reviews for the 9600X and the 9700X are online now at Tweaktown. You can read them. You're probably seeing images now. The big takeaway, I think, with Zen 5 is that let's start with the 9600X. This is a sub $300 US CPU. It's affordable, and but compared to the previous gen, the specs look almost identical, right? You've got 6 cores, 12 threads, which is considered low end for a modern CPU for if you're running high end rendering and stuff like that. It's, you want more cores and more threads. You want more. The clock speeds are very similar to the previous gen, but like the big difference is the power rating, right? The 7600X and the 7700X were 105 watt CPUs, and these new Zen 5 CPUs are 65 watt. So it's like almost a 40% reduction in power usage, and which is important, right? Especially with Intel having issues that seem to be stemmed from voltage. And high power usage for CPUs. So what are we seeing with the 9600X is that you're getting gaming, like let's just look at gaming performance. So comparing the 9600X to the previous gen flagship, the 7950X, you're getting pretty much the same sort of game performance on a 65 watt CPU compared to a 170 watt CPU.
Wow.
And to me, that's impressive. And pretty much most of the reviews are saying that the 9600X, like comparing it to the previous gen, is impressive because of the price, the efficiency, and that you could put this CPU in a small form factor PC, right? So like efficiency matters if you're not building like a full-on massive desktop with AIO cooling with a 360 millimeter radiator and massive GPU and all sorts of system fans going. But let's say you're building like a small form factor PC with one of those stylish little fractal design cases, and you're going to put a CPU in there. Like, are you going to put a 9950X 170 watt CPU, or like, if Intel wasn't having issues, like a 14900K, which can draw up to 300 watts, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like a one-to-one. Like if you got 300 watts, that just means you're going to have that much more heat generated, which means you got that much more of a cooling problem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It trickles down. The problems cause like a cascade.
Yeah. So not only are these lower power, but they run a lot cooler and a lot quieter. So you're looking at 20 degrees cooler than the previous gen 7950X, right? So
wow.
Which is massive for a CPU. That's under load as well. So that's running full load.
That's crazy.
And that 65 watt pushed to about 87 or 88 watts with these two CPUs. That's running, I ran ADA 64 Extreme with hardware info 64 to double check the sensors and stuff like that. And the ADA 64 Extreme test basically stresses the CPU, the cache, the RAM in your system. I unticked the GPU because I didn't want the GPU running 100% as well. It was just basically because it's isolating everything related to the CPU.
Yeah.
And just ran that for like an hour, and just
cooked it.
And just monitoring, like I wasn't sitting there watching.
Just watching the graph.
Like the little graph that
it dropped.
Yeah, it just drops a degree, increase a degree. There is a point where these CPUs start very, very cool. When they're idle, they're like in the 30 to 40 degree range, and the power usage is like 20 to 30 watts. They run very, very efficiently if your PC is doing nothing, which is good because the 7950X idles at like 100 plus watts. So it's already idling, like using way less power just in idle. So if your PC is just on, these CPUs are great for efficiency if you're in a location where power is a concern. Inflation, prices, like Australia, right? Power bills go through the roof. So these are great for that.
Help us.
Yeah. So like you run that test, and at a certain point the temperatures skyrocket because like the CPUs are being throttled. They don't like skyrocket, but they increase to like pretty much hit their sort of like max of like power and temperature.
95 is about the thermal ceiling, right?
Yeah. And like Celsius. For the 9600X, the power goes to 87 watts, and the temperature, like the hotspot, only went to 67 degrees.
And do you have an AIO, or is this fan?
Yeah, AIO cooler. So using my Asus ROG Ryu 360 ARGB cooler, and
nice.
Because like the motherboard as well as Asus as well, they provided me a system for my test bench for GPUs, but I've used it obviously for these CPU reviews as well. And like going to the 9700X, which has more cores, 8 cores, 16 threads, but the same 65 watt power rating, that power only jumped up to 88 watts instead of 87, and the temperature was was higher, but only hit 73 degrees. So that's like way below like the throttling limit. Like, you know, like AMD has had 95 degrees for a while now, but the previous gen Zen 4s ran hot. So Zen 5 runs cooler. So like one of the criticisms that Zen 4 had was that like these just run pretty hot, and AMD came out before they say, look, these are going to run hot. So like having it hit like 80 to 90 degrees is normal. For those CPUs. And even though like once the limit is like 95, like you see that get so close to the limit, like is worrying. But AMD said, no, that's normal. But with these, the Zen 5 generation so far, with these two CPUs, it's pretty much nowhere near the limit. And you could just air cool these with a very basic sort of like CPU fan. And there are great options, affordable options, and you would have no issues at all.
I have a question. So with my 5600X, and I know this is Zen 3 now.
Was it? Yep.
Yeah, the 5600X came with I think it's the Wraith Spire.
Yeah. These don't come with coolers.
These don't come with any.
No, they don't come with coolers.
That's such a shame because
yeah, that was cool when they did that.
It was just easy for gamers, I thought. Like when they would buy their new CPU, this was like 5600X. Well, the 600. You know how you have got like Ryzen 9, just down. The way you look at the CPU names is, I don't even know what that is called, the numerical value that's third.
Yeah, it's like Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7, they had the coolers.
Yeah. Yeah, I just thought that was such a great inclusion for gamers that are picking up their first, like just say their first CPU.
Yeah, because you don't have to worry about spending an extra $50 for a cooler.
And no, not necessarily worry about spending the money for the cooler. It's finding one, like being confident that one's compatible. Like someone that has zero knowledge, like, you know, your brother or, just
that it's going to do what it says it's going to do, right? Because there's like so many options. Like if you go into a PC store and you look at the coolers, you got like shelves full of them, and you're like, okay, which one?
Yeah, and why?
Like, what's this going to do? Like, is it going to work? Yeah.
Yeah, I was a big fan of the inclusion of the cooler. But yeah, so it seems like this generation, at least from AMD on the lower end CPU sides, is efficiency. Are we going to see the same from the higher end? Like, is it just going to be efficiency across the board?
Yeah, the 9900X is a lower power versus the previous gen version. So that one, yes. But the flagship one is the same sort of power rating as the 7950X, but like I think it'll be more efficient, but it'll be drawing the same sort of power. You know what I mean? That'll be more of a linear, so like the normal thing that you expect to see, which is like, okay, it's doing more with the same sort of power profile, whereas this is doing more with a more efficient power profile.
So we're not seeing raw performance out of. I mean, I think it's probably a good thing for AMD, considering the current climate of instability issues in the CPU
what I
landscape.
Highlighted in the review.
They put out a new generation of chips that hopefully, like fingers crossed, because it's been 12 hours since they've been out. That there is no instability issues across the board or across the entire generation, because I know reviewers as a member of the industry, if I was a CPU reviewer right now, I would be searching for problems in these things.
Yeah.
Because given what's happening with Intel, the microcode problems, the oxidation, the RMAs, all of that, there is going to be a microscope on this, and I think we were saying this last week, on the new generation coming out, to make sure that customers and buyers of this generation are getting what they're paid for. They're not getting ripped off. They're not buying chips that end up being faulty. So I think it's a safe bet from what AMD's done here, is not gone for. I mean, they probably didn't know the extent of the Intel problem when these chips were being manufactured, but and maybe it's like a happy coincidence where it's like, oh, well, we weren't really planning on putting like a bunch of raw performance into this new generation. We're just going to go for stability, get that efficiency way better than Intel's inefficient CPUs, and we'll play it safe for this generation. Maybe next generation, like, what would that be? Do you reckon they're going to go to 10,000, or we're going to see a naming change?
There might be a naming change because of
Because
like the
wouldn't that
Ryzen
be-
AI. Like I don't know. Like who knows? Because like Zen 5 is going to be used for like mobile chips as well, which will be the next gen Ryzen AI chips. It's going to be used for server side stuff. And to be honest, like the architecture, you know, if you're looking from a pure gaming perspective, it's like okay, like I don't know why you would expect, like you know, double the performance or whatever, just purely on a CPU, but like if you look at like the single core performance, like Cinebench's single core test, so like the Ryzen 5 9600X at 65 watts, the single core delivers a higher score than the Ryzen 9 7950X at 170 watts.
Wow.
Now,
Okay.
multi-core,
So it's better and
yeah,
more
for single
efficient.
core, the single core performance. Now, what Zen 5 has done, the architecture is that they've redesigned the actual core itself. So, like how it does a whole bunch of different things, like branch prediction, bandwidth for the cache,
The CDM.
like how many instructions it can potentially do on a core at any particular time, has all been like expanded upon. So the improvements aren't specifically them going to the TSMC 4 nanometer node, right? So it's not just the node shrink equals lower power, better performance. It's not just that. They've actually redesigned the core, which I think will have more of an impact for when you have like, you know, massive server chips with multiple cores, right? Running where the CPU is handling everything, right? And I think that the multi-core performance of the 9950X will be probably unbeatable. I think it'll be the most powerful CPU when we see reviews of that pop up in about a week or so.
Wow.
Because like the 9600X and the 9700X, you are limited by the core counts, right? So like if you're doing like a multi-threaded multi-core test, if you've only got like 6 cores and 12 threads, it's not going to be able to compete with a 16-core CPU from the previous generation, right? With 32 threads. You just got like triple the cores or whatever it is. Like you're just not going to be able to do that. But the single core performance is better than that. So it'll like maybe it would have been nice to see AMD like for the 9600X for the lower end to say like, okay, now the baseline is now 8 cores instead of 6. And now when you jump up to the 9700X, it's now 12 cores instead of, like, I don't know even if that's physically possible.
With the
to do it
footprint
like
of
to
the
be
chip.
as simple as that. But you know, obviously there's, because at the same time these are AM5 chips, so you could plug this into your existing AM5 board with like a BIOS update. So AMD is doing that thing like they did with AM4, which was like the 3600 and the 5600s. You know, like it's like you don't need to change your motherboard to upgrade your CPU, which is, I think, a consumer friendly.
Oh, definitely.
And like a feather in the cap, so to speak. Like, you know, that's a good thing. And, you know, like the next generation of Ryzen will also, you know, work on the same boards, which is great because it's just like, you know, swapping out a GPU. Like as long as you got PCI Gen 4 or whatever it is, you know, for a GPU, you don't have to worry about the next generation, like having to swap out your whole system. It's the same now with the Ryzen CPU. So if you got... So if you picked up like a Ryzen 7000 series CPU and you look at these new ones, you go, well, it's not, I don't really need to upgrade because, you know, single digit performance gains aren't worth, you know, $300, so to speak. But if you then they say, I'll wait for the next generation, and then you wait for the next generation and then those CPUs come out, all you need to do is just then swap out your existing CPU. You don't need to buy a whole new board and things like that, which is always good.
AM5 will be around until 2028. Then they say
they
that
said
at
at least 2027.
Yeah, at least 2027. Okay. Yeah. So
they said 2027 and beyond. So I think that 2028 for sure. Yeah, I don't see them.
So ultimately, do you think? What do you think about the other reviewers online that are constantly beating down this generation? Do you think it's maybe they're not looking through the entire, or like maybe they're trying to find
because
the
like
worst part about the CPU rather than highlighting the best parts?
No, I mean they all highlight the best parts, but then like it's more like the title then is then like, okay, it's like you just highlight the worst part as like the tagline. If you know what I mean?
Right.
But I think that like for like if you're building like a gaming PC, the 9600X, like a budget or a mainstream gaming PC, and you want a CPU that's going to last a long time, then the 9600X is a great option. But like if you're going to use the CPU specifically for rendering tasks or video stuff or
Productivity stuff.
productivity stuff like CPU heavy sort of things, then the 9700X is better than the 9600X because you got the more cores and more threads. But then again, the more flagship options that are arriving in about a week or so will be better again because you got the more cores and more stuff. But
Right.
The other question mark is that like AMD kind of like feels like they're on their own at the moment in terms of this CPU launch, because like the competition being Intel at the moment is kind of like, that's a big question mark. It's like, why would I go out to buy a Intel CPU if I'm a consumer at the moment? I'll just do a search online for Intel 14700K or 14900K and then just look at all the articles and go, okay,
There's
maybe I
not a
should
chance.
stay away from that. It's just, you're going to make your decision based on what information's out there.
You just Google Intel. Oh, wait. And then hit the news side.
Yeah. But
and it is a bloodbath.
Yeah. But then the efficiency side is important, right? Because like even if you look at the equivalent on the Intel side, like the 14700K for the 9700X or the 14600K, like those are CPUs that are still pushing like double the power, drawing double the power of these CPUs, and also like in their turbo mode go all the way to 200 plus watts for a very small performance gain. So it's I think that like efficiency is maybe not as important as performance, but it's right up there with performance. You know what I mean? It's like it's a part of the story. Like you can't ignore it. You can't just say
the yin and the yang. I kind of see it that way. And I think, like I said earlier, AMD coming out with a generation of CPUs that are extremely efficient speaks volumes, considering Intel's main problems with its current generation of CPUs is efficiency.
Yep.
So like I think it's a massive win for AMD judging on these benchmarks. Obviously we haven't seen the full stack of chips yet, but if it all kind of shakes out how we think it is, Intel is going to be pressed.
Yeah.
This next generation that comes out.
And because the single core performance is so good, right? And a lot of games still just rely on single core performance for any sort of like CPU stuff that they do, right? That this bodes well for the 3D versions of these CPUs when they launch later this year. So like, they're at the end of the day, like you could say that like these are great, but because the 3D chips are for gaming, like it's probably worth waiting.
Yeah, true. Yeah, it is probably worth waiting. I would say so. Like, especially, X3D chips, they're were particularly good. I think it was last generation or the generation before. I know the Zen 3, like when I was looking
and there was
for a CPU, they were fantastic then.
Yeah, the 7800 X3D is one of the most popular. One of the most popular CPUs on Amazon and Newegg because their gaming performance is exceptional.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep our eye on the new chips when by the time you're hearing the next episode of this show, they should be out, and we should have already been talking about them. So,
in my review
tuned.
At the very end, I basically just wrote, if Zen 5's architectural improvements and overhaul translate to what makes X3D great for gaming workloads, we could be on the cusp of a game changer, because they changed like the core, the single core design that seemed to be like really impactful for workloads that are relying on like core core performance, and that'll translate to like more cores for like server stuff and like high end with like the 9950X. And if you're looking at non-gaming workloads, productivity workloads, and stuff like that. So if the 3D V cache on top of that for these, like, you know, the mid-range 9700X 3D and then the 9800X 3D, if the 3D V cache does for like is, you know, also like basically if it complements what Zen 5 brings to the table, then that could be like a massive boost for gaming. And that'll be interesting to see. It's just weird that I guess like AMD isn't coming out with like a gaming first option as well. If you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I would have liked
like, you
to
know
see
what I mean?
that.
Like it's like, hey, if you want like productivity, this is the 9950X. That's what you need for like heavy workloads for rendering, compression, server side stuff, database thingos, all sorts of like whatever, like, you know, productivity stuff. But if you want like this is the straight gaming chip. Like, yeah, sure, it can do that stuff okay. But like if you want just straight gaming performance, this is the one. And they still, like, you know, the X3D chips are associated with gaming, but they, like, from my perspective, I don't see AMD coming out to say, hey, we've got new gaming CPUs and this is our new gaming CPU range. Like, I think they should almost delineate it to say, like, these are just standard all-round CPUs and then these are the ones that are just for PC gamers. Kind of like, you know, like GPUs are for gamers and like, you know, these are the CPUs for gamers.
I would like that. That would be good. Yeah, we'll keep our eyes on it and let you guys know when new chips are out. But for now, we are going to move on to a pretty explosive report that is coming out of 404 Media, if I am correct. I just want to get the link up for you guys. So here's the headline. NVIDIA caught scraping human lifetime of YouTube videos per day to train AI. This is something that we've been talking about in the show for quite some time. Both of us have predicted that, guessed that most of these companies that have massive AI models have already scraped large swaths.
It's a fair assumption to make when AI can generate images that look like certain things. Like, you know, like even if you can say like, to an AI, like show like that meme, you know, like Will Smith eating spaghetti.
Yeah.
It's like, well, where are you getting his likeness from? It's like obviously from a video somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Something.
Is that video under copyright? Is that video just on YouTube? Because that'll be the easiest source, right? And yes, it is, because Google says if you scrape our videos, that's a violation of their terms of service. Like all those YouTube downloading websites and apps are basically violating the YouTube terms of service. They're just like bypassing them. Like, you're not legally supposed to, you know, download a YouTube video and have it locally offline. You know what I mean? Like, they're not, like you're not supposed to have them offline.
I used to do it back in the day to get music that I couldn't get elsewhere. I used to use one of those websites, download the YouTube video, extract the audio, and then just render it in an MP3 and then put it on my iPod Touch. Load it into iTunes.
Right? But you're not using it to train.
Oh, like, no. 13-year-old me wasn't training his own AI at home.
With billions of dollars of hardware.
NVIDIA apparently is training its own AI hardware on YouTube's videos. So this kind of came out, started the story of companies violating terms of service, particularly with YouTube. I think it was last week or the week before, we talked about a Proof News investigation that found more than 170,000 YouTube video transcripts were used to train AI models from Apple, NVIDIA, Anthropic, and other companies. These video transcripts were within a data set that was used, a public access data set that was designed and aggregated for academic purposes. Because it was public access, the companies just downloaded it and used it to train their AI systems. Whether they knew or didn't know that the dataset contained YouTube video transcripts is up for interpretation.
Yeah.
So
I remember like you mentioned it like a while ago, but then I saw it again this week. There was that OpenAI CTO when they were being interviewed, and like I saw the clip again. It was like it's like funny, like when the interviewer asks, like, are you using YouTube or whatever it was, like to train, ChatGPT or whatever, like the AI models, and then
it's like that. I don't know.
I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. It's like you're the chief technical officer.
Yeah, surely you would know.
You're the technical officer. You're not like the marketing guy. You're the technical
you're not like
officer.
the spokesperson, because the spokesperson can, like, has that sort of like shield to basically say, well, like, like I'm not in the lab.
Yeah. I'm just a lackey. It's like, no. You're the technical officer, the chief. So this has kind of happened again with NVIDIA in terms of being quote unquote caught here. So a new investigation has come out from 404 Media, and according to the publication, they spoke with a former NVIDIA employee about the company's internal processes for AI training. According to this employee, NVIDIA staff were instructed to scrape videos from Netflix, YouTube, and other sources.
Yeah, these are apparently internal memos or emails or documents leaked.
Yes.
So when they say NVIDIA is saying that NVIDIA is saying that they're doing this, it's not officially saying it's leaked documents and emails and even like Slack chat that 404 Media has saying that they've got access to.
Yeah, so this is from employees. NVIDIA has refuted most of these claims. I'm pretty sure all of them. So this person said to the publication that they're informed to scrape Netflix and YouTube videos along with other sources to add to data sets that are being used to train AI models for the following NVIDIA products: Omniverse 3D world generator, self-driving car systems, and a quote-unquote digital human avatar product, along with the Cosmos deep learning model. According to the report, NVIDIA made efforts to hide its tracks from YouTube by running multiple virtual machines, VPNs, to avoid detection.
NordVPN.
They're using NordVPN to scrape YouTube. So here is a leaked email that was sent to 404 from Ming Yu Lu, NVIDIA's VP of Research and a leader of the Cosmos project, Deep Learning Cosmos project. We're finalizing the V1 data pipeline and securing the necessary computing resources to build a video data factory that can yield a human lifetime visual experience worth of training data per day. Now, they don't say that they're using YouTube videos in this sentence exclusively. But the publication did say that employees, when they raised concerns about the source of the data and the ethics surrounding how it was acquired, managers assured employees they had clearance to use the content for training from the highest levels of the company. Lou wrote in a Slack message that was reviewed by 404. This is an executive decision. We have an umbrella of approval for all of the data. When asked to comment on the report's allegations, NVIDIA said its AI training practices are, quote, in full compliance with the letter and the spirit of copyright law, end quote. What do you think about this? Do you think they used YouTube content? I
think it's the wild, wild west. I think OpenAI, NVIDIA, Apple, Google, Meta,
they're all,
even all the other startups that, this is just a guess, right? Like, I don't know for sure, but it's just like, if you're looking at these large volumes of data, I think that it's a given that they're using, that they're scraping stuff that's out there. Like, we've already seen, like artists saying that, hey, or like, publications saying like, oh, New York Times, you're using our stuff. And, digital artists that are saying like, hey, this to whatever image generator, if I type this in, why does the result look very similar to my original artwork, if you know what I mean? And so like it's how did it come up with that? It can't just be out of nowhere, because all this generative AI is just based on data. And if you're looking at like the amount of data required for this sort of training, like where are you going to get it from? And
Exactly.
Microsoft's CEO of AI basically said, look, if it's online, and free, if it's on social
Freeware,
media,
Costa.
if it's YouTube or whatever it is, hey, we can use it. If it's there, we can use it.
Now, I suppose I have a few questions about this, because I, in my professional opinion, believe that whether NVIDIA knowingly or not they have scraped YouTube data, probably millions of hours worth of YouTube videos. And it's like you said, it's not just NVIDIA, it is all of these massive AI companies. I think they have plausible deniability when this YouTube data is packaged in a larger data set that contains public access data, like, Shakespeare's plays. What did they do? That they
royalty free.
The Winnie the Pooh is how they made a horror movie of Winnie the Pooh because it became free IP after
or they just like pay a subscription to stock footage, which costs them nothing, right?
Yeah, and which costs them
exactly. Then they just have however hundreds of thousands of hours of stock footage access to, or public domain videos, public domain songs, public domain literature, like you said, Shakespeare, public domain, whatever else, characters and whatever. And then you mix it in with like everything else, because you just, the appetite, right, is like insatiable. Like you cannot
get enough data.
You know what I mean? Like you can't have enough data.
Feed me, Seymour.
Exactly.
Feed me. That's what the AI models are doing. They're the big plant from what's that? What is that movie? It's Mike Myers.
No, it's Little Shop of Horrors.
Oh, Little Shop of Horrors. Yes, that's it.
With Rick Moranis. Yeah.
It is. It is bizarre. Don't you think it's bizarre that I know that reference, considering my age is 26?
Yeah, I know it because I watched that as a kid.
Yeah. Little Shop of Horrors. Sorry, we're getting sidetracked here, but I haven't seen that.
I put it up on the screen.
Reese, put the. I'm looking at the plant. It looks so bad.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't seen it in probably decades. So
just do a quick Google. The 1986 Little Shop of Horrors plant when it's grabbing the very nice blonde lady. It's like blah.
Oh yeah, it just looks like
that is every AI model that is on the internet right now. A big trade is that plant. Food me.
And the blonde is YouTube videos.
That's YouTube. Yeah, Reese, make that a meme and put it on the screen.
Yeah, just replace the head with just the YouTube logo.
Yeah, put the YouTube logo on the plant. Put the YouTube logo on the pretty lady and AI models. Or all of the NVIDIA logo, Apple, all of them.
NVIDIA
put them on the
logo
plant.
could be like the plant's head.
Yeah. This is my question. When we see more and more of these investigation reports coming out and the digital paper trail becomes a lot more visible, because right now it's a bit hard to actually, see what is going on. I'm not even sure if it's going to be possible, but I think the lawsuits and the potential of the amount of money that Google would sue everybody, right? Aren't we going to see
isn't that
a massive class action lawsuit against all of these companies that are using its data? It said not too long ago, which is right after what you were referencing with the CTO of OpenAI, is that's why YouTube came out and its CEO said any scraping of YouTube's data is a strict.
Yes, but a lot of these companies, even like Reddit, have they're kind of
you got to pay for their access to their data.
They're adding that as they've updated all their services, right? And they're trying to make it seem like they're retroactive, but legally they're not really. You can't change terms of service, and you can't apply that retroactively. You can't just put something in there and say, well, 5 years ago you did this because it's now in our terms of our service and now you violated it. I think ultimately I think this comes down to it being grey, right? And grey legally means that it's in favor of these companies because it's grey because it's brand new, right? So if your generative AI model is trained on all this data, right? You're not, like, that data is temporary, right? It's just trained on that. Like, it's not part of the model, right? So you're not literally infringing on copyright in the legal sense because you're not recreating that specifically. It's like, well, you used it to train, so isn't that the same thing? Like, is that copyright infringement? Like generative AI is so new, and I think in the last few years we're hearing about all this now that it's being trained on this data or that data or every piece of artwork, the Lord of the Rings books or all these Harry Potter series and whatever else has been fed into these things. Because you can just, it's almost like the library lending laws. Like they would probably say that, like, does this fall under education? Does this fall under, is it copyright infringement? Because there's no legal precedent. There's no actual laws to this that are specifically being created for. And I think that's what they're banking on, or that's what would have ultimately said, yes, let's do this at the highest level, because there's no precedent for it. And if there eventually is, and if they have to make deals and blah, 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 they'll make sure that it's not retroactive and all the damage is done. So then, like I think we talked about last time, is that, like, it's going to get to a point where the wild west side of AI is over. And then, so then if you're a startup now, you're basically starting, the gun's gone off, everybody's run, they're already at the finish line, and now you're starting because they've got the head start. And I think that's what it is. Like, they're using this as like this head start before it all becomes transparent, before we know the extent of it all, and before we know the deals that are in place now, before we know all the legal precedents, before we know what new laws are going to be in place, how they're going to be enforced. I think they're banking on
plausible deniability, right?
Yeah, they're banking on this, like, the whole idea that it's so new, it's so different. Even to say, like, well, we don't think that is because it's not that. Like, it's not.
Yeah, they're pretty much like people are like, you stole YouTube's data, and they're like, nah.
Like, we're not like,
me.
AI isn't generating the exact same video, right? It's like, it's almost like
the different color.
Knockoffs, right? Like, the Nike logo that's just slightly different, right? It's not an infringement on the trademark because it's not the exact thing, but it is kind of like, like back in, like, the days of, like, cheap electronics, you got a Panasonic and then you buy the Palsonic. You know what I mean? It's like the name is like, it's so close, but it's not that, but people are buying it because it's close to that. If you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, okay, so, like, you're not infringing on their copyrighted name, but it's close, and you're banking on people confusing that with that, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's such a weird sort of that it's not like a one-to-one. That's the problem. It's that, like, if it was like a bootleg copy, like, it's like, hey, you're selling this movie or this game and you don't own the copyright for it, then you're clearly breaking the law.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll keep our eyes on these types of stories because we have been talking about this for quite some time.
That being said, like, I think this is wrong, right? I don't think you should be able to do that. Like, you shouldn't be able to just take every single, like, song on Spotify and then train your AI music generator to recreate songs in the style of all these popular artists. That's not on, right?
Yeah, it's not good. So right now, just to wrap up the NVIDIA accusations, these are just accusations. NVIDIA has refuted all of the claims that are made in this report. There isn't a clear paper trail to, pin this on NVIDIA. And I also, and this is probably a bit of conjecture, but I don't think they're alone either in this, and you don't believe that they're alone in this at all. I think all of them are doing it. And
like, if NVIDIA can justify doing it, like, internally, let's say the allegations are true and they've justified it at the executive level because of whatever reasons, then it's safe to assume that everybody else is doing exactly that. Because to stay ahead, like, you're not going to, like, if one person does it, the other person does it, and that's how you get. That's why you need, like, a legal precedent to say that, like, like a single case that says rules in favor of the copyright holders, and then that's the precedent for everything else that's related to that, and then nobody's going to be doing that anymore.
So really, we need Google to sue for there to be a legal precedent of data and
Or
transparency.
Reddit to sue OpenAI saying you've used all our thingo. It's like, somebody like, or even just the New York Times case to be ruled in favor of them, then it's just going to be a legal precedent that can just apply to anything that's similar. So then that's just any copyrighted material then used for training.
Yeah. Well, let's keep it on NVIDIA because we're talking about them. I did a story the other day of NVIDIA scrambling to respond to a regulator probing over its 90% share of the AI chip market. It's clear from anyone that is involved or watching NVIDIA or even the tech industry as a whole, they have a monopoly in the AI chip market that is... it's unbelievable. It's like the Windows monopoly. There is not a better option on the planet than NVIDIA's products if you want to train AI models. And because of how, they went over a $3 trillion market cap, became the most valuable publicly traded company in the world. Because of this, it has attracted the attention of regulators, and so it should. NVIDIA is now catching the attention of the Justice Department. Who else is looking at them? The European Union. They're fun. Apple loves them. Britain, China, and I'm guessing a few other more home-based regulators. But right now it seems to just be the Justice Department on the US side of things. I'm sure the European Union is going to have something to say to NVIDIA.
Yeah. If anybody will force change, it's always the EU because, they're the reason why Apple's got USB-C now, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, they made them change the entire port in their phone because it was just the lightning connector was just an inverted USB-C.
Yeah, just having the chip on the outside. It looked cool though.
It did look cool. Okay, so the Justice Department has already launched an investigation into NVIDIA's sales practices and one of its most recent acquisitions. That's according to 3 people familiar with the acquisition that spoke to the New York Times. It was only a few days ago that the U.S. progressive groups, along with Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, pushed for the U.S. Justice Department to investigate NVIDIA over competition concerns. So to respond to this, NVIDIA is building new offices and acquiring the necessary staff. It is hired 4 public policy employees. In 2024, the Green Team has hired a competition attorney that is working alongside NVIDIA's current legal team that's responding to any antitrust questions. Do you think we are going to see an antitrust case with NVIDIA, given its current position in the market?
Well, NVIDIA, if you're looking at it from like the perspective of people just following the industry in terms of the technology industry, just broadly AI, et cetera, NVIDIA is an AI company that makes GPUs primarily. And obviously there's the software side of it. So I don't see, when it comes to these sort of things, the solution is to break up the company, right? So let's say you're Microsoft and you've got the monopoly on Windows, but you've also, let's just say for argument's sake, you had the monopoly on laptops as well. Let's say every laptop out there was Microsoft, let's say. And so then you go, okay, you've got the monopoly, and then so you force them to separate, right? So then the Windows becomes its own company and division, and then laptops becomes that. That's how you break up monopolies. You just literally break up the company is how traditionally that's sort of dealt with. But I don't see how you do that with NVIDIA if that's what they do. It's what do you spin off GeForce to become its own business? But that doesn't, it doesn't really change.
Yeah.
They
still have the best product. That's the thing. It's you can't break up the product unless you put a total number of sales
and at the same time,
of unit sales.
And if they were pushing AI a decade ago when nobody was, and they were developing the software and the hardware and the GPU,
the foundation,
and if they were doing machine learning and they were thinking about the digital earth and then self-driving cars and using AI for robotics. And if they were doing all this, nobody else was doing it. And then that means that they're 3 or 4 years ahead hardware-wise. And that means there's an AI boom now, so everybody wants specifically their high-end GPUs. Then how do you punish them for that? Then like maybe like the solution is that, you know, they find that, okay, because you're so far ahead, that means that you're just charging whatever you want, and you know you just. But then like I don't. It's just weird. It's like, okay, you've got the monopoly, but then like how do you punish them, and why do you punish them? Because
it's almost like you're punishing them for being good at what they're doing.
Yeah, like you're punishing the best because they're the best and they helped create a new
it'd be
industry.
like, not to make it's probably a crappy sports analogy, but like imagine if Michael Jordan was just getting gimped every single game that he goes out, and he's just like dropping 30, winning the game every single time.
You're only allowed to play for like 12 minutes, 1 quarter.
Yeah, but then like the coach is like, look, we got to give the other boys a run around on the field. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like sit down, have a rest. Yeah. And Michael Jordan's like, it's like it's tight. The score's tied. Let's go. Come on. Let's get onto the field. Yeah. Put me on. But yeah, I don't know what the answer is here.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is either. Like what do you do to then you just have to limit what they can, the amount of products they can release or what they can charge. So
that's the only reasonable or logical thing that I can think of is a limitation on unit sales.
And then you're just forcing. So then you're just giving other companies time to catch up because you don't want it to be a single horse race, which is like fair enough. Okay, like if that's how US based capitalism worked, but it's not really how it works. Like mergers and single companies controlling a bunch of different things is how it's done, right? Like, I mean, it's a very different industry, but you look at, like, I think like when it comes to like monopolies and stuff like that, like it was more litigated in the past. But if you look at like, let's say like Disney owns Star Wars, they own Marvel, they own 20th Century Fox now, they own pretty much like 70%. Or like if you go to the movie theater, like 80% of the movies are all Disney, under the Disney umbrella. Yeah. They even own most of the theaters in the US. So it's like, like 30 years ago, there's no way that they would have been allowed to do that. But like that's just where it's ended up. Like, like mergers, and they bought this and that money. They were successful. They made the right decisions, whatever it was. Or even if it was just like predatory practices, or like, they muscled their way in. And, you could say the same for NVIDIA as well. But like that's just the way it all kind of works, isn't it? And if they...
Yeah.
And when it comes to their GPU hardware, there's no... Like if there was an equivalent for like the upcoming Blackwell GPUs or the Hopper, like similar sort of specs, but it's like a competitor, and it's like you can buy, if you can choose A or B, and NVIDIA is purposely interfering with the production of the competition's model, or obfuscating, or saying like, if you buy that, we're going to lock you out of our software or our support. You're not allowed to run our chips and their chips at the same time. Like if that's what is uncovered, okay, like interject and force a change or whatever the case is. But like from the outside looking in, it doesn't look like that's what's happening. What looks like what's happening is that there is just every single major tech company is buying up all these NVIDIA GPUs because they're all in on creating these massive AI data centers and training these massive models to do whatever with it eventually. And yeah, there's no equivalent from what we can see, like systems or whatever that can hit that level of performance or be able to meet those requirements that these companies are looking for. Like, even like OpenAI and Meta and stuff like that, they're all say like, yeah, Amazon is making their own chips, Microsoft is making their own AI chips, Google as well, Apple as well, because they don't want to be dependent on a single supplier, which is NVIDIA. And that's the competition right there, right? They're all working on it. Like there is competition coming, but they're all so far behind that it just seems that like, saying that it's just a monopoly is like, well, like if they're the only people playing, then if there's no other players, then like, it's not their fault.
Yeah.
If they set up the board.
Speaking of companies that are behind, we should move on because we're getting a bit strapped for time.
Yep.
Let's talk Intel again. So, like we said earlier, if you just do a quick Google, if you write Intel into Google and hit Google News, you'll see a bloodbath of negative press stories. And one of them, in the sea of negative Intel press, Intel cuts 15% of its workforce after disastrous Q2 sales, dying CPUs and the bleeding market share to AMD. So 15% of its workforce equated to, how many was it? 15,000?
Something like that,
15,000 employees were laid off at NVIDIA. No, not NVIDIA, Intel, sorry. And within 24 hours, Intel stock sank 30%.
Yeah, and then there's been movements in the global stock markets, that, downward trends that, I'm not a financial expert.
Neither am I. But we should paint the bigger picture here is that Intel isn't the only company that is seeing massive layoffs. We're also looking at, I did a story yesterday on Dell. They crushed their HR department by laying off, I want to get the number here. Dell crushes its HR department with 12,500 layoffs in a single day. So they're looking to become more streamlined and reduce their workforce to under 100,000 people. Yes, 15,000 jobs were cut from Intel, and the stock of nearly 30% dropped. Dell didn't drop as much, but it did lay off 13,000, which is just a staggering amount of people to lay off. But this is kind of like a drop in the water compared to the larger perspective of the market. We saw a $2 trillion. That number is it's hard to even visualize that amount of money. I think it's almost impossible. $2 trillion wiped, 2.1 wiped from the stock market. I think this was yesterday or 2 days ago, a couple of days ago. $2 trillion wiped from the stock market. Cryptocurrency dived, lost 340 billion in value. It was a sea of red. They called it blood in the water. And look,
or for the business, the industry, they'll call it market correction.
Or that, yes. And these companies are some of the ones that we talk about almost every episode. I'm just looking at this image here that has been passed around on social media platforms. We're talking Microsoft down by 4.6%, Google, Apple, NVIDIA down by 11.5%.
Amazon, Meta.
Amazon, it's a lot. McDonald's gained by 0.12%. Tesla down by 10%. This was a huge industry, huge global sell-off. And of course, from that sell-off, we have those fears of recession, etc., etc. And that is about the peak of my financial knowledge. And I think we should probably end that story there before we say something we shouldn't.
What this means, and it just all we can highlight is just okay, the industry is, I guess, in a state of big question mark.
Yes. So tied from our perspective, it's the Intel CPU stuff, Intel firing as probably some kind of correction to their Q2 sales and future sales and current problems.
But also they're building foundries and they're deals with the US government, and they're having, it's more than just, from our perspective, it's Intel, where what we see is the issues with their 13th and 14th gen CPUs and stuff like that. So it's not you don't, they're not cutting 15,000 jobs or 15%, whatever it is, just based on that. I don't think that's the main issue here, because like you said, it's all these other, basically all the big tech companies, but Intel seems to be hit the hardest because they've kind of had a bad quarter and they're losing share and stuff like that. There was another story that will probably be going up today or tomorrow, where AMD has reposted, or like market research, the research firm shows that in the last 5 years, AMD's server CPU share has increased from something like, I think it's like either 2 or 7%, something like a single digit percentage, to now like 25% or something like that. Like it's like in 5 years. So like,
Wow.
and that just means they've taken that from Intel. Their desktop and notebook shares have increased, their market share. But like not to that dramatic amount. So like, I guess like with Intel, Intel is just known for CPUs, right? And then like back in the day, when AMD wasn't as widely known as it is now, or like didn't have anywhere near as much market share, because market share is how you get awareness to a lot of extent. So like back in the day, Intel would have been like 90% plus in every department, right? So then like if your earnings are down and your market share has dropped from 90% to 70%, then that's a cause for concern, and that's probably what's leading to that sort of uncertainty and them taking drastic measures to cut an ungodly amount of jobs. It's just insane, the amount of jobs. Like it seems like a band-aid approach to something that you shouldn't be like, just shedding.
So many people.
Yeah, it's too many.
It's so many. But with that being said, let's move on to a bit of a more positive story. Let's talk AMD's new GPUs, new Radeons.
Let's go to gaming. But I don't know if it's that positive, because it's like, ooh, AMD's got new gaming GPUs. But don't get too excited, because they're this is not RDNA 4. This is not their next generation. There is like sources saying that AMD isn't done with the RDNA 3 generation, and that they could be releasing low-level, entry-level GPUs, like a Radeon RX 7400 and a 7300. What will these look like? Tiny, compact GPUs, low power, and probably low performance. Probably at best an RTX 3050 level of performance.
Oh, wow.
So these would be, I would say, like $150 US cards.
Yeah.
Which was actually pretty decent for like a very, very budget rig.
Okay. Are you going to get samples of these, or?
If they do exist, yes. Because they don't really have a budget apart from like the previous gen 6400, which was kind of a flop because it wasn't well received. It was like 4 gigs of VRAM, very low specs, and it was just like was poor performing. So like if they manage to get like decent performing, low spec cards, then that hits a price point that they don't really have something new. You know what I mean? Like NVIDIA is still producing 3050s because they're that's like their $200 US card, and they're super popular. You look at the Steam hardware charts, and cheap. Well, not cheap, but like affordable. Like the more affordable they are, the more of them that they sell.
Yeah.
And then you have the anomalies, right? You have the 4070s or the mid-range cards that do really, really well because you got a lot of serious PC gamers out there. And NVIDIA is owning that sort of market with their 40 series at the moment.
I'm excited for these lower end cards because I don't know, I just want Radeon to be dominating in one one aspect of the stack, you know what I mean?
But here's the thing, right? Like what I like, as much as I like, if I'm playing like a modern game, right? If I'm going to play Black Myth Wukong, and I'm going to play on my 4090 or 4080 Super, whatever's in my PC at that time. And that's a given, right? Because that's a cinematic game, and I want that ray tracing. I want I love visuals like that. That just adds to the immersion for me. But I also love indie games. I love retro games. Like the latest thing I'm doing is emulating PlayStation 3, which surprisingly is easier to emulate on a Windows PC than an Xbox 360. Way easier. And it actually runs really well and faster.
Is that because of the APIs?
Well, it's confusing because the PlayStation 3 was notoriously difficult to develop for because it wasn't x86 or like a PC.
Right.
It
Why
used
is
like
it
this.
easier then? I'm assuming the
It's
x86
whatever,
instruction
it's just
set
the
would be
talented
way easier to
there's
emulate for.
the people that have developed the PS3 emulator, which is called RSPC3 or whatever it's called, the popular emulator, like they're just a talented group of people. But like what I'm getting at is that I've got like a mini PC that has a Ryzen chip with integrated Radeon graphics, the 780M, like integrated into the CPU, right? So that's a low level GPU. That's equivalent to what one of these new Radeon GPUs are. And I connect that to my PC and I play, like PS3 games that run flawlessly on it. But I also play like Hades and V Rising, with like 1080p medium settings, and they run fine, right? Like they're just like that. It's not like, I don't use that for playing the latest games or like.
Well, you only need 60 FPS at whatever res you're playing at.
You can play all these sort of games and a lot of modern games too, just at lower settings. So, like for AMD to release a compelling entry level baseline, very basic Radeon GPU is actually pretty cool because it's like, I can build a very tiny PC, gaming little PC for under X amount of money because the GPU is only like $100, 150. I get a very basic CPU, motherboard, some basic, 16 gig of RAM, put an SSD in there, and you're done, right?
Yeah.
So like there is a case for it.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. I hope these cards are real and I hope they come out and they're efficient and very price friendly for gamers. Because
I think
even though I do believe to some extent that, releasing 1080p cards right now is only holding back the ever-growing PC industry.
I think it is. I think you spawn on like the one area where it's stagnating or where it just feels like we're treading water is the entry-level and mainstream GPU sector.
I agree.
If you look at the 4090, that's an amazing GPU, way faster than the 3090. And, the 5090, rumors are saying it's going to be way faster than the 4090, right? The 4070 is equivalent to a 3080 Ti or a 3090 in a lot of games. A beast at 1440p. Even like the Radeon 7900 GRE and the 7800 XT, great for 1440p mid-range. It's like the mid-range and the high-end markets are being served with products. There are, could they be better? Sure. Should
with
they
reasonable
be cheaper?
Upgrades, yeah.
Should they be more affordable? Definitely. I mean, because, the prices are what they are. But, like the 1080p, the mainstream market, like the 4060, yeah, it's a decent card, but it's 12% faster than the 3060, and that's all it needed to be, at the same price. So a decent option for like a new build. Like I wouldn't upgrade from a 3060 to a 4060 because, but if you had a 2060 or a 1060, get a 4060, right? But there's just no competition at that level. Intel has some GPUs, but there's, the drivers aren't great. Some games are great, some aren't. They're decent options, but then the Radeon, they just have an NVIDIA equivalent. They've got a 4060 equivalent. Intel have a 3060 equivalent at that same sort of price. They're all just like doing the same thing at that level. Like you need somebody to come in to say like, here's something that's dirt cheap, that performs really well, punches above its weight. And here's a new mainstream GPU that punches above its weight. And then that'll be more exciting, I think, than just, okay, here's another super expensive GPU that blows the competition out of the water.
Yeah, and AMD can't respond with something of their own as well. Or I hope that the lower end does get served a bit better, and I hope those cards are real. But let's keep it on to gaming and let's talk Ubisoft and the.
This is a story that I specifically wrote the headline to highlight what the specs are saying. So like, Star Wars Outlaws is a new open world Star Wars game coming out at the end of this month. There's been recent hand-on previews and some people saying like, this doesn't look great, whatever the case is. And you've reported on like how much they're trying to charge for like to play it 3 days early and,
that was Assassin's Creed.
And this as well, I think, is the same sort of thing, like to force you into like, it's the same thing to force you into the Ubisoft Plus or whatever it is.
Very cool, Ubisoft.
But separate of that, right? All right, and like setting aside what we think of Ubisoft as a publisher and the prices and things like that, they released the PC hardware requirements for Star Wars Outlaws, and they're pretty hefty, especially if you want to play an Ultra with ray tracing, right? They say you basically need a 4080 or the flagship Radeon, the RX 7900 XTX or better, which is funny because the only thing that's better than either of those two GPUs is a 4090, right? But these are like, they're like, you know, like a tiny, tiny fraction of PC gamers, according to Steam, have these GPUs, right? It's, you know, there are heaps of them out there, like, you know, 4080s and 4090s. If you count them all up, it's like, you know, maybe 1% of all Steam gamers, but there's, you know, 100 plus million Steam gamers, right? So that 1% is, you know, a sizable, to some respect, audience. But most people are going to be playing on the recommended or minimum specs. But the weird thing is that, and I know we've kind of had a back and forth on this in the past, and I know your position is that DLSS and upscaling is becoming a crutch for developers, whereas I kind of lean towards, I like that they're pushing game visuals to the point where you kind of, where upscaling is a part of the total thing in a way. But anyway, their minimum specs for Star Wars Outlaws means that you need the recommended specs, let's start there, is that they're recommending a RTX 3060 Ti, which is not a 3060. Most games kind of like target the 3060 as the recommended, or the Radeon RX 7600 XT or better to play the game at quote-unquote 1080p 60 FPS. However, they're saying that's with an upscaler, so with DLSS or FSR set to quality, which means that the game is actually running at 720p and then using upscaler to render to 1080p. So they're saying, they're recommending that they're saying that if you want to play Star Wars Outlaws at 60 FPS, you're basically going to have to render the game at 720p to be able to play at 1080p.
That's crap.
Because I kind of agree with you here, because upscaling works best, I think, 40p and higher. Because I think 1080p DLSS looks good, but it's like I wouldn't have that as the baseline. You know what I mean? I wouldn't
Just let me play on native as well.
Yeah, you want to be able to like play on native.
Yeah.
And so, but even then, like the minimum specs, 1080p 30 FPS, they're saying a GeForce GTX 1660 or 5600 XT or very basic ARC GPU, that's 1080p 30 with low graphics preset, and that still requires an upscaler, which in this case would have to be FSR, because the 1660 doesn't support DLSS because it's not an RTX card, and that's also rendering at 720p.
Does the game look as good as Black Myth Wukong?
The game looks good, but I know that it's going to look good in Ultra, right? Because the Ultra has ray traced global illumination and ray traced shadows and reflections, right? And you can understand for 4K, you'd want DLSS quality, and that was going to look better than native. Like DLSS, like upscaling at 4K is perfectly fine for that to be in the specs, because that's expected for ray tracing, right? Ray tracing and upscaling go hand in hand, and always have been. And NVIDIA have never sort of said like, hey, you know, play control with ray tracing. It's no, like, here's control with ray tracing and DLSS. That's the reason why it's playable. Like, you need that technology. So it makes sense there. But like on low settings, do I think the game's going to look good? Not really. Like, it'll look okay, but like I think, but like I guess like my question to you is like, do you think then that they're just they're not really optimizing the game properly, and they're just saying, well, we're just going to use DLSS upscaling as a way to hit a certain performance target, and that's it? Like,
unfortunately, yes.
Let that be how we hit 60 FPS. It's like we don't hit 60 FPS without it, and we're just going to just use DLSS and leave it at that.
Yeah, I think, I suppose my position when we were talking about this previously was, I'm pretty sure it was the Unreal 5 story. You actually can't turn off DLSS. You can't turn off the Unreal 5 upscaler.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the own. I can't remember what it's called.
It's like a temporal one. Yeah.
Yeah. And because you can't turn that off, you get stuff like this, where you get your minimum game, like you're not even running it at 1080p. 1080p 30 FPS is what the Switch does.
Yeah,
and how old is that?
Yeah. Well, some of these GPUs listed there. Oh, well, no, actually, they're not that old. The Switch is like so old.
You know what I mean? Like, developers shouldn't be relying on that, like these upscaling technologies to hit performance targets. They should be hitting the performance targets natively, and then the upscaling is the cherry on top. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't think it should be, especially at the low resolutions. Not necessarily, like, I agree with you completely. At ultra and high and at 1440p and 4K, yeah, you can make it so you can't turn the upscaling off. Whatever. It doesn't matter at that. It doesn't really matter.
That option will be in the game, right? So, like, yes, like, because it's a PC, you have control over, let's say, like, you've got a 3080, right? So you can run the game natively at 1080p 60, most likely with a 3080. Assuming
should be able to.
That's should be able to. Right? That's an assumption because, like, based on every single minimum, recommended, high, and ultra, every single spec that Ubisoft have outlined basically says that it's all with upscaling. So maybe you can't actually
turn
hit
it
a
off.
certain level of performance without upscaling. But I'm assuming that you should be able to just, like, if you don't want upscaling, great. But, like, based on this though, like RTX 3060 Ti, so, like, based on this data and looking at the Steam hardware survey, right, for the recommended specs, basically most Steam gamers that are going to pick up this game are going to have to enable upscaling. They won't be able to play it.
So on the AMD cards, they will be able to play it
otherwise.
You'll enable what?
Sorry?
FSR. On the AMD cards, you will have FSR automatically enabled, because it says here it's all quality, and that's DLSS, right?
No, FSR has a quality mode.
So it's the equivalent on both.
Yeah, it's equivalent.
Okay.
So
Right.
DLSS and FSR quality modes are both kind of like the step down. So 1080p would be rendering at around about 720p.
Wow.
And 1440p quality would be rendering at about 1080p. And 4K quality would be rendering at about 1440p. That's the internal resolution. So, like, yeah, so for Ultra...
I just don't want developers to get lazy, Like, this technology is so impressive. I don't want it to be used as a crutch. I want it to be used as a tool.
Yeah.
Like, I want developers to do what they were doing normally and hit these performance targets. 1080p 30 FPS, well, not even 1080p, 720p at 30 FPS is a joke for a game that is coming out in 2024.
And upscaling doesn't look as good at that sort of lower resolution. That's the thing. Like, that's like why I say, like, in 4K, sure, because you've got ray tracing and you're upscaling from 1440p, and it's already been... there's already so many examples that with DLSS and ray tracing, right? Cyberpunk 4K with ray tracing and DLSS quality versus native. DLSS quality looks the same or better, right? Especially if you're using ray reconstruction, which makes the ray tracing look better. It actually looks better and it runs faster. So at 4K, it's proven that, like you said, it's a tool, right? It's a tool to make that possible, which is what makes it a great technology, right? Because you're doing things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Like, you wouldn't be able to have ray tracing at that quality without DLSS or FSR. But at 1080p, if you're just running the game using the low quality settings, that means low quality textures, low quality draw distance, lower quality character models in some cases, lower quality shadows, lower quality ambient occlusion, or lighting effects. So the game is going to look like, kind of like the potato version in a way. Like, it's going to look at its absolute worst. And you're saying that you're basically turning down you're turning off all the fancy visuals, and you're saying, well, I'm turning off all these fancy visuals, and you still need DLSS or FSR. That's the problem.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think you hit the nail on the head. Yeah, I just hope this doesn't become like a normal kind of thing. Yeah.
I think this is like, I think I highlighted it as well because I think this is going to become the norm, because the PS5 Pro, when that comes out, apparently is, Sony have developed again their own AI upscaler, because they see what's happening in the PC space. And Microsoft has got their own AI upscaler, but that's just for Copilot Plus gaming. AMD obviously have FSR and frame generation. It just seems that and PC gamers are partially not at fault, but you know what I mean? Like PC gamers are like, performance is king, right? I want 100 plus FPS. I want this, I want that. Like it's performance. It's like, I don't want to play games at 30. I don't want to play games at 60 anymore. And so these technologies facilitate that ideal, that saying like, you want performance, this is how you get it, with DLSS upscaling, with some frame generation. If your PC is not that powerful, we're going to have to invent latest latency reduction technologies to lower latency. We're going to have to do all this sort of fancy stuff in order for it to hit that. And this is basically saying, well, this is filtering down to no matter how you play the game or how you want to play it or whatever hardware you have to. We're leaning on these technologies. And I think that's probably going to be the norm going forward.
I reckon it's going to happen. I suppose there's going to be games that come out that have really leveraged these technologies in the right way, and then there's going to be games that come out that don't. And I reckon this is probably an example of that. Right now,
like, if this becomes a norm, then raw performance is just going to be
arbitrary,
almost like a review only, so almost like just like a benchmark figure, and that's it. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like raw performance becomes a synthetic benchmark. You know what I mean? Like
actually,
it's like running the game natively and showing you how fast it runs natively becomes 3D Mark in a way, because that's not how people play.
Yeah, because it's static.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you would actually, for you to run a game benchmark on Star Wars Outlaws, you would probably need to record your frame rate, frame time, and resolution over 30 minutes for you to get an accurate average.
Oh, well, you wouldn't be able to then review, like basically every, like GPU, like if this is the norm, and because I review GPUs, it just means that every review would highlight the upscaling performance and then include native rendering as secondary.
That's bizarre. That almost was I could get
and
a nosebleed.
What are you actually recording then? Because it's not.
Yeah.
Because upscaling isn't quite testing the raw capabilities of the card, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So it's just weird. Like, you know what I mean? Like you would have to include both if that's what every game has and
you
what
would
every gamer is using. Sure, you could just stick to the traditional method, but then you're doing a disservice. Well, not necessarily disservice, but then you're not presenting a real world scenario or use case, right? So it's like, it's like saying, oh, here's Cyberpunk's path tracing mode, or Portal with RTX's path tracing mode, or Alan Wake's, right? And just showing you the graph, and it's running at 21 FPS on a 4090, and going, that's it. You go, well, that's not the story, because like if you enable that mode, you're supposed to have DLSS and frame generation on, and then it runs at 90 FPS or whatever the case is. So like, you can't just have that one single, you can't, the inverse will be true as well. Like, if it's just, just a regular game, like you can't just show the raw performance, because now regular games all rely on upscaling as well.
You're right.
So
you have to
show that
both.
upscaling. Yeah.
It'd be your due diligence as a reviewer to do both.
To include both. But then it gets, where it gets messy is that no two upscales are alike. DLSS is exclusive to
oh my God,
NVIDIA.
You're going to have to run these benches.
FSR is like, but then there's like, do you compare FSR to DLSS, or do you run FSR on the GeForce card? But then that doesn't make sense, because DLSS looks better. But then the upscale ratio won't be the same for both methods. And it's all just like a mess.
You can't do the standardized testing. I feel like Neo when he gets the...
Your brain will just melt. Yeah.
Yeah, you get the Matrix plugged in for the first time, and he's in the chair, and he's like...
There's a way to show all of that, but it just becomes... it's way more complicated than what it used to be. And then like every game... So instead of just like benchmarking a game at 3 resolutions, which I don't test, or I don't include DLSS figures at 1080p because I don't believe that that's
warranted.
That's warranted because I think at 1080p you should be playing natively. And I agree that yes, you can play with DLSS at 1080p, but you're sacrificing some visual quality, but you're getting performance. So it's a trade-off. If you want to do it, great. And for some cards, and if you want performance, do it. But at 1440p and 4K, those figures are relevant because it's worth enabling. And at 4K, FSR is worth enabling. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you just make that decision to say, yeah, the trade-off is worth it. But if it's just a blanket thing at every single resolution like we're seeing here, like, I don't think 1080p with FSR is doing a service to the game, especially on the low settings. So it's going to look worse. It's already running at low at 30 FPS, but it's going to look worse than just native 1080p because you're rendering at 720p and there's not enough visual data for the upscaler. There's not enough pixels.
Yeah.
So like upscaling looks better the more you like upscaling from 4K to 8K looks great because you got 8 million pixels to
upscale
to work with, right? So the algorithm's like, yeah, this is more than enough if I can make this look, perfect. It's still going, add some detail here. There.
1080p, there's like amazing. 40 pixels and
1080p to 4K kind of they've kind of nailed that with DLSS performance mode, but then there is a degradation in visual quality. There is a sacrifice. That's why they say quality mode. Quality mode is how you maintain quality. But anyway, it's just so messy that this particular, with Star Wars Outlaws, there's a lot of people now saying that like, what, 720p? It's like you've gone back in time.
Oh boy, it does feel like we're going back in time. I think we should end it on there. I think that was a great discussion about that, and I hope you guys that were listening learned a few things about DLSS and how it fits into the resolution stack.
I think it's like we both think it's great technology, but
absolutely,
like I said, like my stance is that I love that it exists because it makes the impossible possible.
I completely agree with that.
Ray tracing, path tracing, all these advanced visual effects and stuff like that. It makes that sort of stuff possible in the sense that you can play it at the 60 FPS that you want to play, or the 80 FPS or 100 FPS on a 4090, whatever it is. Like, it makes it all frame generation. It gives you like a glimpse of like how games are going to look for everybody in a few years time or a few generations time. But like where it gets messy is that like, well, we're just going to use it for everything, and this is the way it is. No games are going to be rendered natively anymore.
Yeah, it's all upscaled. Everything's dynamic resolution.
And the Switch 2 is probably going to be upscaled, like we said, but it's a good thing, right? Like DLSS.
Yeah, I mean for that console, yeah.
Yeah, but even then, like the PS5 Pro, if that's doing it, like I think, like I don't think this is not the like if Star Wars Outlaws is, like doing this now, like I think that every game is going to do it forward. Like, I mean, like even like PS5 games now, like the PS4 Pro upscaled did use checkerboard rendering to make sure every game was outputting at 4K for 4K TVs at the time. And so like it's technology that's not going anywhere. But like what this is showing is that like this is potentially going to be the norm going forward. And obviously on PC where people expect the absolute best of the best in terms of optimization, or would like to see, and PC games have been burnt with bad optimized games. So this just kind of like looks like, oh well, like you're saying, it's a crutch.
Yeah. With that said, thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of the TT Show. As with every week, all of the stories that we talk about during the episode are in the description below in a Google Docs link. If you open that up, you'll see our show notes. Pretty much all of the background of the show is in that document, along with a bunch of stories, some stories that we didn't get to. The CPU reviews for AMD's latest chips are on Tweaktown right now. Go check out Kosta's reviews if you want to learn more about the 9000 series. And do you have anything to sign off this week's episode?
No. We'll probably get to see what the two flagship ones look like next episode.
All right. Thank you very much for listening, guys. See you next week. Bye.